ACC Nation football preview with our special guest, the publisher of 24/7's Demon Deacon Digest, Les Johns. Les, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be on, Jim. Hope you guys are doing well.
Doing well, indeed. Same for you. Hey, it feels almost inevitable, Les, that when Wake Forest football is discussed in broader circles outside the informed inner sanctum of the ACC media, it feels like a Rodney Dangerfield bit to me at times. I don't think I'm going too far out on a limb here to say Wake Forest and Dave Clawson don't get no respect.
Yeah,
How do you feel about that?
That's probably fair to say, Jim. It's weird because, it's now getting to the point where Dave Clawson's name is getting brought up whenever other, positions are becoming available. For instance, as soon as the Northwestern stuff came down, his name was immediately thrown in the mix. But yet Wake Forest as a program probably doesn't get their due for what they've done over the last few years. In terms of the ACC over the last 6 years, they had the second most wins in the conference, tied with Pittsburgh, behind Clemson. They're the only team with the 7-season bowl consecutive bowl streak in the ACC, aside from Clemson. So, there's a lot of good things going on in Winston-Salem, and they happened before Sam Hartman was the quarterback, and they're going to continue to happen even after Sam Hartman's been the quarterback, because there's a lot of folks who think that Wake Forest was a one-player team over the last couple of years, and that's not the case. So, they don't get the respect. I wasn't surprised to see them picked 9th in the league by the media. I was a little bit surprised that some of the receivers didn't get recognition on the preseason All-ACC team. I thought Jamal Banks and Donovan Green probably deserved to get up in there. Donovan Green, of course, has since ruled out for the next 3 to 5 months with the knee injury. But that voting was done before we knew that.
Right. And you mentioned the 7 straight bowls, 6 winning seasons out of 7. Wake Forest is somewhat of an anomaly, but as you mentioned, we talked a bit briefly offline before we started doing the program. This is a program that does invest in its facilities, in its program, in its coaches, as you just mentioned. And it's a program that works harder to be more, but tends not to get the respect I think it's due. Here is something, a term that I want everybody to keep in mind as we go forward with Les. 2 deep, 3 seasons. 2 deep, 3 seasons. Now, that's important that you keep that in mind as we go through this preview, because as Les just mentioned, the wide receiving crew did not get the respect. Again, I'll tell you, if I had a tie, I'd do that. They're not getting the respect that I think they should be, and obviously that you do as well. Before we get into offense, let's start on defense, Les. It's always struck me as being that one part of Wake Forest football that was a wall to even bigger things. Your thoughts?
And that's a fair assessment, Jim. It's one of those things that if they were just maybe 1 touchdown better on defense over the last 3 or 4 seasons, they would have had a lot more success. I will say that a lot of times when you look at defensive statistics, they become a bit skewed for a team like Wake Forest when you run the kind of tempo that Wake Forest runs on offense. That's going to lead to more possessions. It's going to lead to your defense being on the field a little bit longer. Most of the time, you're not going to win the time of possession, those type of things. That being said, there had clearly been issues with that Wake Forest defense. They were not very good at third down defense last year. They gave up way too many explosive plays, especially over the top in the passing game. And those are things they're really looking to kind of fix in year 2 of the Brad Lambert era in terms of being the defensive coordinator at Wake Forest. They've got a great group of safeties. We feel good about those. They've got a couple really standout corners to start in Kalen Carson, who I think can put together a borderline all-ACC season. And then beside him will be Deshaun Jones. They're being really disruptive in camp. And then there's a couple younger guys that are showing out too. So the staff feels better about where they're at in the defensive secondary. They've got a great group of linebackers. The biggest question mark for Wake Forest on the defensive side probably comes at defensive tackle, where they lost their top three guys in Deion Bergen, Tyler Williams, and Miles Fox. Those three guys are gone, and there's really only one guy in the middle who had any substantial time last year. That's Kevin Pointer. So they brought in a couple transfers. There's some younger guys in the mix and some guys who've been in the program. There's about 4 or 5 guys in the mix, and they've used the first 10 practices trying to sort through those. And I'd have a hard time telling you, like, I could probably put together 11 of the 10 defensive starters, but I don't know yet who that second defensive tackle is, and the staff probably doesn't either yet.
So let's get a little bit more down into the dirt here with these linemen. And on paper, Les, it looks like it was a big task ahead of the coaching staff and I think you've just kind of laid this out, to put together a group of guys that can work together, stuff the run, and put on pass pressure. Across the line, is there anybody specifically that you think is really standing out, and the people that are behind them? Because as I said earlier, that 2 deep and 3 years, this starts to become very important for every aspect of Wake Forest in general.
Well, one thing that folks probably don't realize when they look at Wake Forest compared to other programs is Dave Clawson's a big believer in redshirting. A lot of times true freshmen don't play. That's liable to be a little bit different this year because this class that I've seen came in is very talented, and they're making some plays here in fall camp. But a defensive line, they brought in 2 transfers. One's Bryce Ganius, and the other is Nick Helbig. They're competing largely in the second string right now. Kevin Pointer is the presumed starter, one of the starters in defensive tackle. But at the end, they're super happy with both the defensive ends. Jasheen Davis led the team in sacks last season. He's come back. And then Kendron Wayman on the other side, they're really excited about that guy. They're both very disruptive. So they've got 3 of the 4 starters. They've got some guys that are kind of trying to fit into that 4th spot. And it's just figuring out who's the cream, that will rise to the top there, Jim.
Right. I was really intrigued. I wanted to hear who you said was going to be complimenting Davis there at end, because that is a critical spot to have if you want to put pressure on quarterbacks and close out the edge. And Jasheen Davis he's a quick guy, and he's
got a nonstop motor. He gets into the backfield often. He's going to be subject to a lot of double teams this season. He's going to be the first guy on the other team's scouting report for sure. And that's why it's going to be critical that those other guys, are capable, right? Because they're going to get a little bit more opportunities. Jasheen's going to have to work a little bit harder for his, because he's a known quantity now at this point. But he has a nonstop motor. I saw him cut down a couple people for tackles for loss today in camp. Wake Forest, where we had the luxury, we get to see from a media perspective, we get to watch every practice in camp, both spring and fall, all the way leading up to like game prep week. Then they kick us out. But, we get to watch all of fall camp. We get to have post-practice interviews with the players and the coaches who we choose. Great access, and it's been that way the entire time I've covered the Deacs. This being my 10th season.
You are getting the cake and eating it too, man. That's all I can tell you when it comes down to that, because that's not always the case with an awful lot of teams.
Yeah.
At linebacker, Jacob Roberts, Chase Jones is back. He had a healthy number of tackles. Talk to us a little bit about this linebacking core and what they are going to be bringing to this equation, and as that second line of defense.
Well, the good thing about the linebackers group is that they're like finally healthy. They had a couple of guys miss spring camp that are now back. So they've got like a full complement of guys. They don't necessarily have a guy that they consider like a top line, like, NFL draft type guys like they've had in the past Ryan Smenda and Luke Masterson before him, but they have probably more depth and talent overall in that group than they've had in the past. Starting beside Chase Jones, who was elected to team captain, will either be Dylan Hazen or Jacob Roberts. Hazen missed the spring with a shoulder injury, but has been mixing in with the ones quite often. Kind of gobbles up running backs, can get into the backfield when they put him out to get pressure on the quarterback, on the blitz. I like what he's doing. Jacob Roberts had a great spring, transfer in from NC A&T. Thankfully for him, he got the spring to kind of get acclimated to playing at a higher level, and he's fit in well. So it's between those two guys. And then kind of spelling Chase Jones will be Quincy Bryant, a converted safety. Aiden Hall's a freshman who they love. Like, they didn't need a freshman linebacker to come in and play, but he's having such a good camp. Clawson said he's going to find some time. He's going to get in the rotation. So they have 5 or 6 deep at linebacker they feel comfortable with, which is not something that's always been the case. Linebacker and safety are the most loaded positions in terms of depth.
Yeah, I was looking at everybody on this secondary list, and I'm just going, wow, there is just an immense amount of experience under these returning players, and that is likely to shut down an awful lot of offensive strikes that people are trying to go deep on the Deacs this year.
Well, the good thing, too, about the secondary is they get to line up against probably the deepest group of wide receivers in the conference every day. They're being tested by 6 or 7 of the best receivers in the conference for sure, and probably some of the best ones in the nation. So they're being tested. At safety, I love Malik Mustafa. Great work ethic. He's worked incredibly on his body. He is a hard hitter, quick. They call him Malik the Missile for a reason. And then beside him at safety will be a variety of folks. But I love Malik. They've got Jalen Garnes, who's playing well. And then Nick Anderson, who was actually 2nd or 3rd team All-ACC just a couple years ago, but missed all of last season with the foot injury. So they've got 3 experienced leaders at safety, and then a freshman and Devon Patterson, who's also probably going to put himself in the mix just because of how good he's playing right now, even though they're already loaded at safety. So like I said, safety and linebacker are the spots in which they had the most depth on the defensive side of the ball.
So one of the things that you're pointing out here to me, Les, is that you've had some difficulties with injuries, which all teams do, but there's an awful lot of these players that are coming back off of that, the bug, and it just adds that much more depth and rotational ability for Wake Forest on defense. It's amazing to me when I look at this, and then I'm listening to what you're telling us. How did Wake Forest get ranked where they were in that ACC poll is beyond me.
It's one of those weird things, Jim, that even when I put mine together, it's really easy to put Florida State and Clemson at 1 and 2 or vice versa, Yeah. And then it's really easy, quite honestly, to pick out 3 or 4 teams that you think probably won't be very good this season, right? But then you get from like 3 to 10, and it's just like, where do I put people? It's like we expect Louisville to be better, but and they've got a softer schedule, but it's year 1 of a rebuild, of a new coach in there. UNC kind of reminds you a little bit in terms of Wake Forest, and in terms of they're going to be explosive offensively, but can they get the defensive side of the ball fixed? Duke, had an uprising last season. Then they face a more arduous schedule this year, and they won't take anybody by surprise. NC State, there's some question marks there, but also a lot of returning talent. It's like you put all these teams in a big jumble, and it's like you could rank any of them 3rd or 10th, and it's kind of hard to argue with it in a way, because there's a lot of unknowns. And the middle of the ACC is just going to be fascinating to watch unfold this season.
It's going to be a battle again. I like the way that you addressed Duke in uprising. That's an interesting way of putting that. And we talk about we went from secondary on defense. Let's go right into the wide receiving core on offense here because, man, this, to be honest with you, if I were a coach, this is the type of thing that would give me night sweats looking at this roster. I can't help but think that if the line holds, the quarterback has time and has a good connection with these guys, which I'm sure he probably will, considering he's been there for a while. Wake Forest will once again be like a hot knife through butter and put up a lot of points. Talk to us about a wide receiving core that is just chock full of quality athletes.
Yeah, the three likely starters at this point, with Donovan Green being down, at least 3 months, will probably be Taylor Morin and Jamal Banks, along with Keyshawn Williams. All three of them had more than 500 yards receiving last year, and that was with A.T. Perry being on the roster, right? Who ended up being drafted in the NFL. So, you had your go-to guy in A.T. Perry. Then you had 4 other guys with more than 500 yards. These 3 guys that'll be on, be playing more than 500 yards apiece, had more than 60 targets each. And Mitch Griffiths has a great connection with all of them, and then behind them are guys like Wesley Grimes. You have Horatio Fields, who had a spectacular spring camp a year ago, but then was lost for the season with an ACL. He's back now. And then you've got true freshman Micah Mays, who's having a great camp. Scored a touchdown late in practice yesterday. Deuce Alexander's a true freshman who's also playing well. Walker Morrell from Tennessee, a former 4-star prospect, transferred during the offseason. They have probably 7 or 8 receivers they can count on, and they're going to bring them in, rotate them in frequently, have fresh guys out there on the field at all time, and just wear you down.
So, in order to make all this happen, we have to get back into the quarterback aspect of things here. Hartman is off to other fields. So it looks like either Mitch Griffiths or Michael Kern are the guys. And I would say that's a 1 and 2, but you can enlighten us a little further about that. Talk to us about what these guys bring to the game. And to be honest with you, I thought Mitch and please don't pull the rug out from underneath of me, Les. But I thought Mitch was showed a lot of potential when he was on the field when Sam wasn't.
Yeah, people probably, I think overall the general national perception is that Wake has lost Sam Hartman, so now Wake is gonna become mediocre or bad again. Folks probably don't realize that Mitch Griffiths has been in the program. This is his 8th training camp. This is his 4th season on campus. He was an early enrollee. This is his 8th camp. He knows this system. He has a rapport with this receiving group. He knows his offensive coordinator and quarterback coach, Warren Ruggiero, inside and out. When if I remember correctly, the story goes when the COVID season hit in 2020 and spring camp was like wiped out, he was messaging members of the offensive line, talking about plays and working on stuff by himself. With his father, who's a high school football coach in Virginia. He was mapping out plays and stuff. It's not like he took that spring off. He was the backup at the time. So this is a guy who lives, breathes, and eats, college football. He's getting his chance. He had the highest completion percentage of any quarterback in the Clawson era in spring camp. Like, they track that stuff. And this is quarterbacks like John Wolford, who's in the NFL, Jamie Newman, Kendall Hinton, who's in the NFL, and Sam Hartman, who's now getting paid, I guess, to play at Notre Dame. So, Mitch Griffiths had a better spring camp than all those guys. So, once again, he's got a talented group of receivers. They believe they have some explosive options at running back. He knows how to find the right guys to target. He's able to run and make plays with his feet and scramble and make passes. I think he's going to have a heck of a year.
I would agree with that. I can't help but think that this guy is going to make a name for himself in a big way this season if everything comes together. That's my observation from outside. I think that That's the one thing that I have going from where I sit is I get to observe everybody from the outside and really don't have a dog in the hunt. And so when I watch all of the teams in the ACC and specific players, man, there's certain people that just stand out. And this guy, I think, is somebody you need to keep an eye on. Talking about running backs, too, about putting things on the ground, two of your dynamic backs transferred out. Justice Ellison is back. There's others there. Who's going to be the workhorse and who's stepping up?
Justice Ellison is clearly the workhorse. He's the leader of the group. He's the grizzled veteran. Um, the most explosive, dynamic guy you're going to see will be Damon Claiborne, a four-star kid out of Virginia. The thing that Damon has had to focus on to be able to be on the field so he can make those explosive plays is the ability to pass block. As a high school four-star, he was the guy on his team. It was basically give him the ball and let him make plays. Rarely did he have to block for somebody else, so him having to stay in and the pass pro and protect Mitch Griffiths isn't something he was accustomed to. So he's gotten better on that. He's really worked hard at that. Tate Carney, Wake had a running back named Cade Carney in years past. This is his younger brother, Tate. And Tate has a little bit more wiggle to him. Cade would just run you over. Tate will actually try to miss guys in the secondary. And then there's Will Towns and David Egby's making some plays too, a young freshman. They probably have 4 or 5 guys that are playable at running back. 1 and 2 will be Ellison and Claiborne, Hardy and Will Towns right behind them. They always go by committee at Wake Forest. They believe in that. They don't believe in having one guy take 90% of the carries. So expect to see a healthy dose of Ellison and look for Damon Claiborne to make some exciting plays this fall.
Carney probably listened to his brother talk about how much time he had to spend in the ice pool after running over people and decided maybe that wasn't a good idea. So, I don't know. I'm interested in seeing how he does and comparing him to his older brother. So
yeah, no doubt.
Hey, let's get into the line here. This may be where there needs to be some bandages to stop the bleed out. Without this group hitting on all cylinders, it's going to be hard to put all of this scoring in place because Wake Forest, top scoring team in the conference last year, folks, and they've got the potential to be there again. Sixth-year senior Michael Juergens moving from center to guard. That's about all I know, Les.
Well, I mean, you've got a good head start on it, Jim. Folks probably don't realize this because on paper it looks like they're replacing like 2.5 of their starting offensive linemen. So everybody's probably thinking, oh, it's a lot of talent, a lot of experience have left the program. They're probably going to struggle at offensive line. I understand why folks would say that. But we also know that because of the COVID year and stuff, folks have been in the program waiting their turn a little bit longer than in the past, right? This starting offensive line for Wake Forest, literally 100% will have 25 years combined experience at Wake Forest. 25 years. Spencer Clapp, one of the starting offensive linemen. This is his 7th season. You already mentioned Michael Juergens, the starting guard, 6 years. In the middle, Luke Pettibone's been at Wake Forest 4 years. Another guy on the outside 4 years, and then there's one player on the offensive line this will only be their 3rd year in the program. Once again, combined 25 years experienced in the program. Wake Forest should be just fine at offensive line. They're doing well, protecting in camp. Today they opened up a fantastic hole for Damon Claiborne to hit a nice little 15-yard touchdown in red zone work. Everybody was pretty excited about that. I like what I see. There's one battle that's ongoing. It's at right guard between Matt Gulpin and Nick Sharp. That's probably the last piece, but I think they're going to be fine regardless of who wins that battle.
Clawson likes to age his players like fine grades of steak, man.
Yeah.
It takes time to move them up, but once you got them there, that
25 years. There probably won't be
staggering.
many other programs that will have 25 years experience on their offensive line this season.
That's absolutely staggering. And earlier I said 2 deep, 3 years. Well, we went a little bit past that 3 years, but it's all about depth, and that's something that Dave Clawson has just implemented to perfection at Wake Forest. And I'm looking forward to this. You're getting me pumped up to watch again.
I'm getting pumped up to watch him go. And this is I don't know if we're going to get into this or not, but it's an arduous schedule for the Deacs. I mean, they play at Clemson, they play at Notre Dame late in the season, and they host Florida State. Those are three pretty darn tough games, Jim. So you figure if you want to put together, let's assume from a negative perspective that you just assume those three are losses, right? Then that puts your ceiling all of a sudden at 9-3. On the other hand, it's kind of silly to consider Florida State a loss right off the bat because Wake's beat them 3 straight times. So Florida State hasn't beaten Wake Forest since 2018. So just out of hand, assuming that's a loss is a stretch. But we all know Florida State's got a lot of hype going into the season. They do have an incredible team coming back. I don't take anything away from them. I picked them to win the ACC. So, but if you assume those 3 are losses, then to have a great season, you kind of got to run the table the rest of the way. And that's a tough thing to do in college football. So the key will be winning 1-score games. Last year, Wake was an unfortunate 1-3 in 1-score games. There's 3 times they had the ball late in the game where they had a chance to win it with a 2-minute drill and didn't finish them off. So if they can win 1-score games, get off the field better on third down, eliminate explosive plays, and win the turnover battle, I think they have a chance to have a good season.
Sounds like it. Hey, special teams, real quickly before we get into that schedule, because I do want to. I want to touch on that schedule just a bit, because, like you said, there's some daunting games in there.
Yes.
But let's talk about special teams, kicking and return men.
Kicker. They got Matthew Dennis back. Punting, Ivan Mora. They're good on both those. And one of the most exciting things about special teams, I think, from a Wake Forest perspective, is that there are so many – they hit on so many of their incoming freshmen of the 2023 class, and those kids are really going to be helpful on special teams. Some of the guys like Rashawn Tung, like Devon Patterson, like Aiden Hall, some of those freshmen that I talked about that are working their way into the rotation – in positions in which they already have depth. That's just going to help their special teams coverage units, throughout all those units. We talked a lot about Wake traditionally redshirting a lot of freshmen. I think this may be the year where Clawson strays from that a little bit because he's got some guys who are ready to go. So instead of redshirting 95% of that freshman class, I think it'll be more like 50 or 60% this year. And you're going to see a lot of those guys sprinkled through special teams. And they quite honestly just need to kick the ball a little bit deeper. So they fell short on that a little bit last year. And Matthew Dennis had missed the offseason strength and conditioning because he's rehabbing from an injury. But he's bulked up a little bit, and I believe he'll kick a little bit deeper, and their coverage units will hopefully for their sake, progress.
Sounds like there's enough reason for opponents to get a subscription for a weekly delivery of Tums to me. Let's get into this schedule. Elon, Vanderbilt, Old Dominion start out the season. And quite frankly, I don't really – maybe Old Dominion because they tend to be a thorn in people's side. But Elon and Vanderbilt, I don't see so much there. Your thoughts on those first 3 games?
I think Clark Lee's going to get it done at Vanderbilt and make them, build them into a respectable program in the SEC. I think he'll come into Winston-Salem and battle, but I think it's a game that, Clark Lee in his 3rd year at Vanderbilt should be behind Dave Clawson in his 10th year at Wake Forest. Wake Forest, I think Wake wins that game probably by a couple touchdowns. Old Dominion, it'll be a sold-out crowd up there, and they have been, like you said, a thorn in the side of ACC programs. I don't think it'll necessarily be easy, but I think the Deacs escape there with a win. And then I'd go a step further and also say that, Georgia Tech under a new coach, that also should be a victory. So the Deacs should begin their season, 4-0, and then business kind of picks up.
Yeah, that's a good way to put that. Clemson, that's going to be a challenging game. Not and as you said before, Wake Forest has delivered win after win against Florida State. Um, there really isn't any reason, based upon everything that this continuation in this building, that there can't be a very competitive game here against Clemson, possibly a win.
Yeah, it's one of those games Wake took them to double overtime a year ago and should have been able to finish them off at home. Um, you know, I don't know enough about the Tigers yet to really know if the Deacs have a chance to make that a competitive game. They've made a couple competitive in the Clawson era, but then quite frankly, there's been a lot of just blowout losses. So playing at Death Valley is never easy. I have that one right now as a loss, but we'll see how things play out. I honestly think the key part of the schedule comes right after that Clemson game, that 4 or 5 game stretch where you travel to Blacksburg, host Pitt, host Florida State, and then play the 2 Big Four games against Duke and NC State. If Wake wants their season to be more of an 8 to 10 win type of year, as opposed to just squeaking into bowl eligibility, that's where they're going to have to really get things done. That's those kind of 50-50 type games, and games that likely go down to the last possession or two, where Wake will really have to execute to have the type of season they believe they're capable.
And then we get into Notre Dame and then Syracuse. And Syracuse always a surprise team for people, and especially Clemson. They tend to be very disruptive to the Tigers for some reason.
Yeah, Notre Dame on the road, that certainly, especially depending upon how the season for Wake Forest is going, is likely to be a fairly marquee matchup. You've got Wake Forest traveling to South Bend to face, Sam Hartman, their former quarterback. So that'll be what everybody in the world will be writing about, and including myself, because you can't just ignore it. But Notre Dame's had a lot of success against ACC teams over the last few years. I think they've won like 28 straight or something crazy. 28 straight regular season games, of course, not counting the loss, I guess it was, to Clemson in the ACC championship in 2020. And then Syracuse, if you're Wake Forest, you probably are hoping at that point that Syracuse season has been rocky, and that also you're not at the point where you need that win to make bowl eligibility. You're hoping you're already sitting at 7 to 9 wins, and that it's just icing on the cake as opposed to the cake itself. So I've got that as a win. I think Syracuse has had a bit of upheaval in the coaching ranks, and they definitely struggled down the stretch last season. I've got right now Wake between 7-5 and 8-4. I'm seeing enough from the defense over the last couple of days in camp that I'm leaning more towards 8-4. I don't know necessarily where the 4 losses I'm going to exactly point those at, but that's what I've got right now.
Yeah, that's where that 50-50 comes in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's an ACC thing.
And I will also argue that I'm very high on this team by saying they're 7-5 or 8-4. I don't mean it in a negative way whatsoever. And the schedule in 2024 is a little bit less arduous. If they return the bulk of what they've built this season, I believe 2024 could very well be a special season for Wake Forest. But when you consider the schedule ahead of them, it's just a tough road to hoe, I think that, once again, that middle part of the schedule is 4 or 5 games are going to tell us whether they had the opportunity to exceed my 8-win, ceiling and pop up and get 9 or 10 wins this season or not.
One thing that I would like to remind everybody, whether you're fans of Wake Forest or any of the other schools in the ACC, is there's an immense amount of parity that's starting to show up in this conference. And that's why you get to this point where you just go, it's 50-50, because you're not sure. And there's a lot of it's very competitive. And as you pointed out earlier in the program, Les, when you go that 3 through 10, it's like,
yeah,
it's like, okay. And we'll see how it all ends up. End of the season, That's the telling thing. And for you to say your projection there on 7.584, I think that's very respectful of where Wake Forest is, and I think that's a good way to look at it. If I were a Wake fan specifically, I'd be going, "That sounds like a darn good season to me." So I would take that and run. So just saying, that's a great look at Wake Forest football with our special guest, the publisher of 24/7's Demon Deacon Digest, Les Johns. Thank you, Les, so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Jim. You have a great day and enjoy the season ahead.